test, I'm just going to take a moment and tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Flora Woodward, and I'm a counselor in the student affairs area of the medical school. And I have been working for, I don't know, more than 20 years helping students to do their best at taking tests. I worked as a counselor, I worked as a tutor, I worked as a test director, so helping students to take their tests at a Prometric Center. And I know lots of ways that you can improve your performance on tests, and I want to share those with you. Tests are something that can be very stressful, but there are lots of ways to use that stress to help boost your performance. And I'm going to talk about those today. I hope that you'll try some of these strategies. If there's one strategy that you try, I am going to be happy about that. So as as we go through this presentation, please feel free to ask questions. This is a small group. If you want to show yourself on screen, you can, but if you don't feel like doing that, you can just put your questions here in the chat. And please ask if you have questions. For those of you who are coming in, I have a link on the screen, tinyurl.com, anxiety resistant. I'd like you to go ahead and complete. There are three pre-tests that I'd like you to do before I give the presentation. And I'd like you to go ahead and complete those, and also take a moment to edit the name that we can see for you. You can name yourself any name you'd like. It could be your favorite movie character or your favorite television character, somebody, but this will give you a chance so that if you have questions, you don't feel like you're giving up your confidentiality to kind of say them. I want you to feel comfortable to ask whatever questions you have. And this way, if you change your name, what you do is you just hit rename. You would just click on the dot in the upper right-hand corner of your square, and then click on rename so that your name can keep your confidentiality. And so just go ahead and complete the first three parts of the survey, the test anxiety survey and the mindfulness survey and the pre-stress rating. And then when you're done, just raise your hand so that I know you're done. We're going to do, so the first thing that you did was a mindfulness, test. And you should know that mindfulness and test anxiety you can reduce your test anxiety by increasing your mindfulness. So we're going to be talking about some mindfulness strategies. We're also going to talk about how performance can be related to anxiety, some study strategies that are resistant to test anxiety, and some strategies for using mindfulness during the test if things get too stressful. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is what exactly anxiety feels like. There's the physical and then there's the mental. And it's funny how anxiety can affect us. For example, if you've been procrastinating, getting started on studying for step one, procrastination is one form of test anxiety. So lots of people procrastinate, and it's often related to being kind of overwhelmed with the process of getting started. So some of the things you might notice in yourself are a rapid heartbeat, increased blood pressure, an upset stomach or nausea, shakiness, feeling just very, very, very nervous, having a tension headache, tight muscles in your shoulders or your back. You could hurt, your body could hurt. You can have tension, clammy palms. You can sweat a lot. and even have blurred vision. So these are all things that you might notice in your body that will affect you during the test. But then there's also the things that kind of live in your head. So a lot of people go blank during a test. And that is related to different study strategies. And we'll be talking about ways to avoid going blank on a test. Sometimes you can get very confused during a test. You can feel disoriented. You can feel panicky, depressed. You can procrastinate. You can put off getting started studying for something. You can have misdirected attention, like the night before a test, you can suddenly decide that you have to really focus on something in your personal life that really could be put off. You can focus on other things. You can feel like you have to run away or you have to fight. You can fixate on one item for too long when you could really just skip it. You can exaggerate the consequences. Like if I don't get this one item right, I can't pass. Or if I don't pass this test, that's the end of me in medical school. And I have to tell you, people don't pass this test, but they still continue. So it's not the end of the world. I want you to do your best on this test, but not passing a test, exaggerating the consequences is one thing that happens in test anxiety, and it's something you can work on. And also you can feel anger, frustration, you can blow up at your boyfriend. There's lots of things that affect us right before a test. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and there are just a few of you. Let's see if we have any results on our anxiety test. So I had you guys complete a test anxiety self-assessment. And if you, the idea behind it is if you selected even just one item on that test anxiety survey, then you do have test anxiety, and it is something that affects you. So you can benefit from this presentation. And it looks like one of you scored a 3 and one of you scored a 5. So those indicate that you can benefit from test anxiety support. Okay. And there are lots of ways that it seems to affect you. It looks like number 2, some people have hard time studying. Some people feel bored or tired during a test. Both of you said your appetite changes right before a test. Either you're not hungry, you skip meals, or you overeat, especially candy or ice cream. That's interesting. Some of you score lower on exams than on papers. That's interesting. And some of you kind of after the test can remember things that you couldn't remember while you were taking the test. These are all different experiences of test anxiety. And so that is interesting that you have had these. So a lot of test anxiety can be reduced by thinking about peak performance research. Now, peak performance is generally done in sports. And if you look at the performance of elite athletes in stressful peak moments of a game, that is where this research occurs. And they have found that performance in these really high stress environments improves with practice. That's why the coach is always saying, practice, practice, practice to the team. So if you look at performance on athletes and also you guys who are elite students, elite athletes and elite students, elite athletes, when they get to that point in the game where all eyes are on them and it's up to them to score the shot that'll either win the game or lose the game. That's a very, very stressful moment. And everybody is looking at them and their heart is beating faster. And some people at that moment are oddly calm and they can just shoot the shot and their performance is actually heightened in that stressful moment. And some people will flub the shot. And the difference between these two kinds of players has to do with preparation levels. People who are very, very over prepared, there's no way that they can miss the shot. They've prepared so much that they just go into automatic. And so they do much better in the stress of a final game. But for people who are underprepared, an ordinary player or an ordinary student, you'll find that in that extra stress, their performance goes down. And really, the key difference is just how much they've prepared. And so that's why you guys who are elite athletes can really benefit from thinking about over preparation. And this is the reason why your people have given you advice to kind of dig deep into those UWorld questions. The more practice you have with sample items and with the format of the test, the more calm you're going to be under pressure. So use this strategy to boost your performance in stressful situations. So now I'm going to talk to you about the way we theorize that memory and learning happens. And this is the way we think of it. There's ongoing research in this area, but this will give you kind of a Cliff Notes version. So you have sensory input. So that might be you sitting down in the test center and looking at the test. And then you read the item that goes into your short-term memory. And then you should keep in mind that your short-term memory is limited. It can only handle 4 to 7 items. So if something goes into short-term memory that you're trying to learn, then it goes down a rehearsal path, and you say it to yourself, you intend to remember, you get it going down that information processing model. And you rehearse it a couple of times, and finally it gets into long-term memory. Once it's in long-term memory, there's a feedback loop back and forth to short-term memory until you really have it. And then once it's really into long-term memory, you're theorized to have that forever. And now sometimes we don't tend to have it forever, but we think that it's always there. It's just making sure you can get it out of long-term memory. So long-term memory, you would retrieve it, and then it would go into output. So you'd remember that key idea that you memorized so long ago, and then you'd show what you know on the test. Well, you should know that along this path, at every point along this path, if you're stressed out and feeling test anxiety, then your level of ability to focus on learning or remembering at any point of this information processing model is impaired. So having some techniques to help you in the memory process and getting the information out on a test can really come down to just figuring out ways to relax yourself at the moment. Okay. So sometimes we forget things under pressure. One is because we never learned them. It never got into long-term memory. Another time sometimes we can have trouble showing what we know on a test because although it's in long-term memory, we can't get it out through the retrieval process because of stress. And also learning takes concentration. If you lose concentration in the number 2, in the short-term memory section, you can dump the information before it ever gets into long-term memory. And so chunking information can help you to get it into short-term memory. You can focus on it long enough to get it into long-term memory. And we're going to talk about some chunking techniques next. So there are a lot of ways that we forget things. I'm forgetting things all the time, as my children will tell me when I'm searching for my keys or I'm trying to remember how to get to that place I needed to get to. You know, there are lots of ways that we forget things. And these are the 5 ways that we have focused on. And there, for each of the ways that we forget, there's a strategy that you can use to reduce forgetting. So one of them has to do with decay. Some of you are studying things for step 1 that are really boring. And if you're studying something boring, it can be very hard to get it into short-term memory, to ever get it into long-term memory. And sometimes we can learn it, but it's just so dull that it fades over time. So it's important when you're trying to memorize things to think of ways to make it interesting to yourself so you can focus on it long enough to learn it. Some people will think about how an illness relates to someone they know, or they'll think about it in ways that are funny. They'll make up a funny story to help them memorize it. One of my students told me that he imagined the immune system is kind of like a little cartoon with bad guys and good guys and monsters, and that's how he imagined the immune system, and he remembered it really well for the step 1. For another thing that we can forget is called displacement. So that's when you cram at the end and you're trying to learn so many things at once that new information pushes out the old, and you just can't learn it all. And so think about it. If you are cramming, try to be strategic and not try to study it all. And if you possibly can, don't cram, especially for step 1. This is a marathon of studying. It's not a quick sprint. You have to kind of learn it gradually. Give yourself lots of time to learn little bits and pieces and really learn them over time. Another way that we forget things has to do with interference. This is like if you're in high school and you're taking French and Spanish at the same time. You might mix up those words, and it might be confusing to you which is which. So a principle to deal with that is to study things that are very different together instead of things that are similar. Okay, the last 2 principles, one of them has to do with incomplete encoding. So sometimes you thought you knew something, but you really didn't. And this is where self-testing comes in. And this is where the you-girl questions are great. Maybe you think you understand the immune system, but do you really know it? That's where doing these very simple ways of self-testing to make sure that when you think you know something, you really know it. And we'll talk about some of the techniques you can use for that. And then the last one, and this is the one that is most associated with test anxiety, is retrieval failure. So you know all the information you've been studying all along. It's in long-term memory, but when it comes time to know it on a test, you freeze up and you go blank. And that can happen when you try to learn something in only one way. So we're going to talk about strategies to learn it with different parts of your brain so that if it freezes up with the verbal way that you remembered it, you can rely on the visual way, or you can rely on the story, or you can rely on something else, some other part of the brain where you've stored the information. So we're going to talk about those. But before we continue, do any of you have questions? Raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next section. So we talked about a couple of different forgetting strategies, and this is how you can deal with them. You can deal with the forgetting by self-testing often, active reading, active studying, visualization, recitation, and reviewing often. So we're going to talk about why that works for your brain. Okay, so this is one of the techniques of visualizing. So I don't know if anyone, raise your hand if you know the difference between a stalagmite and a stalactite. Do any of you know that funny funny thing that helps you to remember it? The way I remember it is this little saying I learned in my geology class, and it was tights hold tight to the ceiling. And then, so those are the little kind of formations in a cave of dripping minerals that kind of drip down from the ceiling. And then when the water lands and creates a puddle, those create the stalagmites. So those are kind of a weird word to use. You know, you might not know it. So remembering a funny little story that somehow relies on the sound can serve as a bridge between your memory and the funny story. You can also think of ways with when you're studying something to visualize it, because that puts it in the visual part of your brain. You can also think in terms of big and little pictures. Learning the big picture first and then learning the details is useful for that principle because you're trying to visualize how the different parts connect to one another. There are some other ways that you can use sound to memorize things. So with mnemonics, you can take the first letter of each thing that you have to remember and create a word or a sentence. So I remember the Great Lakes by remembering homes. So Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. Homes is an easy way to kind of remember them because the first letter for Huron is H, the first letter for Ontario is O, and so on and so forth for the whole acronym. And for those of you who are trying to remember dementia, the frontotemporal, Lewy body, Alzheimer's, and vascular, FLAV takes the first letter of each, and that helps you to remember it. So that serves as a vehicle to chunk the information into 4 to 7 items, so it sticks in your short-term memory, and then you've got a link to your long-term memory. When you're coming up with these, a funny sentence is easier to remember than a boring sentence. So try to think of ways to make it interesting to you, like the student who came up with a little cartoon with the bad guys and the good guys. Make it interesting to you. This helps, you know, humor helps to use a different part of your brain. So you want to store it in all these different parts of your brain. You want to use your visualization, your hearing, and your imagery. Okay. This is a technique. One of the things we talked about is thinking you know something, but really you don't. These are 3 different strategies you can use to self-test. Now, you have the UWorld questions and you have the other self-testing programs, but when you're working with your notes or a textbook, it's important to take some time and write things down. And when you write things down, you're storing it in the motor regions of your brain. So it's storing it in a whole different section. And when you're thinking of how to organize things, that's helping you to understand the big and little levels of information. So the questions in the margin system is for a textbook. You write your questions in the margins, and then you highlight the answers in the text. Then to self-test, you cover up the text, you read the question, and then you answer it, and then pull down the piece of paper to reveal the answer. You can do the same thing with the Cornell note-taking method. You take your notes, you write questions in the margin, you highlight the answers in your notes, you cover up the answers with a piece of paper, you read the question, you recite back the answer, and then you pull down the sheet of paper. This tells you immediately whether you know something. And, you know, some of you are very visual, and so you're going to benefit from making a mind map. And so you draw the main picture in the center, and then you make branches to all the details. And you can use that the same way. You can cover up the details and then recite back everything you know about that center idea. So these are ways for you to know when you really know something. And then when you don't know something, you can study it some more and figure out a different way to conceptualize it. Okay. And then another idea, we were talking about visualizing, hearing, and then there's reciting. When you recite something, there are a couple of reasons why this works. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, what can I tell you about uh, Lewy body dementia? Or what can I tell you about the frontal lobe? And then you just say out loud everything you know. And then you think about that. Saying it aloud, when you transfer it into your own words, you're doing some processing, and this transfers the information from one part of your brain to the other. It also works because you intend to remember. You're really focusing very hard, and it gets into your processing. It also works because you get immediate feedback. If you can't say it out loud, then then you know you don't know it and you need to study it some more. And this uses a different part of your brain. One of the students who talked to me about using this strategy, she would line up her stuffed animals and she would just talk to them, or she'd go get her dad, and her dad didn't know anything about medicine, and she would try to explain something to him in a way he would understand it. And doing this helped her to really learn it. So try this. If you're getting stuck, the trick with studying is just to be active about it, to keep doing various things so that you don't just stew, you don't just procrastinate. There are things you can do that are, you just keep doing them and eventually you learn the information. And then the last strategy that I think is important is to review often. So when you're making your study schedule, you can be tempted to say, oh, I'm just going to study all day, and that can be fine. But it's better to give yourself stop and end date time. So instead of saying, oh, I'm going to study for 8 hours, you say, okay, I'm going to study for 30 minutes, then I'm going to take a short break and go for a walk, and then I'm going to study for 30 minutes. It's better to break down your day. And then let's say your first chunk of time is immunology, then you pick something very different from immunology for your next section. This technique works because you focus on the beginning and the end of a learning period. So if you make the learning period 8 hours, you're going to know the first 15 minutes of what you've studied and the last 15 minutes. So you only get 30 minutes of active memorizing time. So it's better to break things up, and that way you can take advantage of really learning the things at the beginning and then the end of a study session. And it also helps you because it takes a while for an idea to kind of percolate in your brain to kind of be something you can actually use and study from. So we've talked about study techniques and we've talked about how to prepare now, which is way before the test. But now I'm going to kind of switch to a new section of the presentation. Feel free to kind of shake out your body. It's a whole different section. If you need to stand up and move around, that is fine. Right now, I'm going to talk to you about preparing for the test on test day and things that you can do. So one of the things that I would say is I remember once taking a test, and I took the train, but I missed my stop, and I had not taken the train there before, so I didn't know where I needed to get off. And so that totally flustered me. I was really only 10 minutes late for the test, and they let me into the test. But that process totally flustered me. And later, when I took the test at a different time, I was able to gain 100 points. And I think that was just due to the stress of being late. So think about, learn from my mistakes and think about ways to make test day as comfortable and as easy as possible. So one of the things I would say is a couple days before the test, go to the Prometric Test Center at the time of day when you're going to be going to the test center so that you know what traffic's like, you know what your path is like to get there, and you're totally prepared for what door you need to go into. And you could even go in and kind of just walk into the test center and say, I'm just kind of checking it out. Tell the lady who's working there and or gentleman, as the case may be, and just kind of look around, figure out where you're going to be taking your breaks, figure out where the bathrooms are, just kind of get the lay of the land. Where are you going to park? Think about what you're going to bring in your bag. Make sure you have the kind of ID that they want you to have that has the names exactly matching your registration for the test. Make sure that you have snacks that you're going to enjoy. Make sure you're wearing clothes that's comfortable. There are lots of things you can do in preparation for the test that are going to make you comfortable. And then you're going to be able to perform your best. When you're sitting there waiting for this test to begin, try not to cram the night before. Relax as much as possible afternoon the day before the test, because you're going to want that rest. You're going to want to be fully rested when you start the test because it lasts all day. And you're going to be very strategic about answering questions when you're tired. You're going to want to take breaks at certain times, and you're going to want to think about your strategy. When you're going through the test, you might hit one item that is particularly hard. When that happens, just use your scrap paper to make note of it and come back to it. Don't spend a lot of time on any one question. And the students who have done best on step one, they have a little timer that they keep track of the time with, and they only give items a certain amount of time. And think about that for how you strategize getting through that test. And then we're going to talk a little bit about techniques you can use to breathe deeply so that when you're stressed out, the stress just leaves you. So, there may be something that really makes you calm in your life. It may be a certain kind of tea. It might be a certain kind of smell. It may be a prayer. It may be a religious item. It may be a picture of a kitten. There's lots of things that you have in your life that help you to deal with stress. You could create a little folder and keep that in your locker at the test center and maybe look through that, read a prayer that's comforting to you, or smell something, a perfume or something that makes you feel calm, like lavender, rose. Those things, having snacks that are calming, those are all things you can incorporate into your test day to make things calmer. And then I have a bunch of breathing exercises, and I recommend you find one that fits for you and use that when things get stressful. Now, some people prefer to meditate. Some people prefer to do a special grounding exercise. Some people prefer to do a little prayer. It's all up to you what you find helps you with the stress. But I have a couple of examples here, and you might find one that fits for you. Okay. So these are techniques that you can use to increase your mindfulness. You would have gotten an email of how you did on that mindfulness assessment. And you should know that mindfulness is a protection against test anxiety. So the more mindful you are, the less test anxiety you're going to have. And mindfulness is defined in this test as being having certain components. So there might be, if you look at your results that you were emailed, there are probably areas of this where you could stand some work. So you could stand some work on observing. Maybe you're not focused on what's going on around you, or maybe you could focus on description. Maybe you are not noticing the details of what's going on the test. Maybe you're acting with awareness, maybe you're not. Maybe you're noticing things, but then you're making judgments about them that are that make you more stressed out. Maybe you're being reactive and getting super stressed by certain things. These are all things that affect your ability to be stressed out or to deal with stress on a test. And I had you do this mindfulness test, and I want you to practice on some strategy to reduce your stress, like meditation. As you practice meditation, you're going to get better and better at it. And I want you to take this test later on and see how far you've come. If you've improved your mindfulness, you should be able to handle the stress of the test much better and use it to kind of perform better, like an elite athlete during the test. Okay. One of the things that is on the mindfulness test that I wanted to discuss has to do with mistaken beliefs. And sometimes, people will make statements about themselves that are kind of mean. I don't know if you do it to yourself. I've heard a lot of people who are just like, oh, I'm not studying, I'm just stupid, or I need to work harder. And they, instead of saying, look, I'm stressed out and I'm doing the best I can, sometimes we're a lot kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. So if you find you're one of those people who kind of will beat yourself up in your mind when you're trying to study, that can really make you even more anxious. So one technique you can use is a mistaken belief correction. So what you do is you write down a statement you have about studying. So for example, if you're on the test, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm drawing a blank. I'll never get the answer. I must really be stupid. So that might be going through your head and you're kind of panicking during the test. So this thought correction is a technique you can do where you just kind of think it through, and you identify and disarm the negative thoughts. You evaluate the rationality of each thought, and then you replace the negative thoughts with reasonable, logical affirmations. And it's funny because sometimes we can get in this loop where we just beat ourselves up. And this is a very good technique you can use to help with that. So, for example, you might think to yourself, actually, I've missed questions on things that I've studied and known before. This has happened before. And you come up with a replacement statement. So I've studied this. I know it. I'll visualize where it's written in my notes to help trigger my memory. So the thing is that you evaluate each statement logically that you're thinking. You could even write it down and then just say, oh, this one's not logical. This one's not logical. Just cross it out, replace it with another statement, and then say it to yourself. And that can help you because it's sometimes the things we think that kind of drive our test anxiety are not logical. Okay. So there are a lot of different techniques you can use for meditation, and that I'm going to give you a link to the handout that you can explore them. But I want to focus on one that's called the eye of the hurricane meditation, and I find it particularly helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and read this to you. I hope you'll just take a moment and make sure you're comfortable. Make sure you're sitting in a way that supports your body, that feels good. And then I'm just going to read this to you. This is a visualization where you imagine a hurricane. And you might know that hurricanes, they're very stormy on the outside, but the center part is a part that is usually very still. And sometimes when you're in a hurricane, you have to be careful because you can be in the eye of the hurricane, the center of it, and it'll look very calm and you'll be like, oh, the hurricane's over. But you actually have to go back in your house and be safe because that's a very short window of time. And then you have to go through the other side to get out of the hurricane. So go ahead and make sure you're comfortable, and then I'll just read this to you. Imagine being in the middle of a stressful storm during exams. This meditation helps you to find calm in the midst of chaos. Think of it like moving to the center of a storm to observe without judgment. Find a quiet, comfortable place to sit with good posture and relaxation. Close your eyes gently if you feel comfortable doing that. And then just focus on your breath, going in and out. Breathe in slowly and deeply. Notice the breath moving through your nose, your throat, down to your stomach. Notice how it feels in your chest, in your belly, and then breathe out. As you breathe out all the stress and the tension in your body. And then just do this gently, breathing in and out, kind of slowly, and notice how it feels. With each breath out, release your tension. Relax your face, relax your jaw, relax your shoulders, and make sure you're sitting very comfortably. Adjust yourself to feel less tension in your body. And try to stay in the present. You might have an anxious thought come about the upcoming test. Acknowledge it, but then return to your breath. Focus on your breathing. The breath helps to keep you focused on the present. Keep breathing deeply. Let the breath connect you to your inner calm. Visualize a storm. Your studies are a swirl, a storm around you, but the storm center is calm and it's a peaceful place. You can gently move to this center by focusing on your breath. While you're breathing, you might notice some thoughts and feelings and sensations. Don't judge them as good or bad, just notice them and then focus on your breath. The storm can change, but the calm center remains. Return to your breath. If your mind gets lost in worries, focus on your breath. It grounds you in the present. It brings you solace. Remember, storms can pass. As you breathe and find your center, remember that tough times are temporary. This challenging time will pass. Take a few breaths. This is the end of the meditation. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes. This is an example of an exercise that you can use to manage stress in medical school anytime you feel like it. And regular practice of these meditation techniques will help you to stay focused during your journey and help you to relax during a test. So now that you're nice and calm, I want you to keep using these great techniques, focusing on your breath. And I'm going to go ahead and show you a video that I found of the Prometric Center, and I'm just going to talk you through it. But I'd like for you, as I'm going through this, to kind of use the relaxation strategies that you've learned so far, or strategies that you like to use yourself as I'm going through this, because the goal is to watch this video, but kind of do it very peacefully and relaxed, focusing on your breath so that when you're in the test center, you can remember how peaceful this was and how you can handle it and you're prepared. Let me find it. Okay.
It's 30 minutes before your.
So this is an example of a test center. You should see a video here. I'm hoping you can. Raise your hand if you can't see a video. And imagine that's you. You're walking into the Prometric Test Center. You're greeting the person who's working there. They may be kind of quiet and calm. They may not be very bubbly, but they're rooting for you and they want you to be able to do your best. And there are lots of rules at a test center, but you can read those at home and learn all the ways that you can strategize to make this testing experience the best one for you. You will have a place to put your personal things. That's where you'll be able to put your lunch. And then you're going to go through this strategy. They're very, very picky about checking all your ID and then using the scanner to make sure you're not sneaking things into the test center. Keep in mind that it's not personal. It's just something they have to do to keep the test secure. And if you have glasses, you might think of a way to have two glasses, one in your locker and one with you at the test center so that it's less time looking at your glasses as you go in and out. You also might want to think about wearing clothes that are comfortable but don't have pockets, so you don't have to turn your pockets in and out. So you can go in and out a little faster. You're going to have a great place to test. It's a carol. It reduces the noise as you're taking your test. They'll be able to see you through a glass. You can raise your hand if you need help, and you can request earphones if you want to help you to really focus on the test. You can come and go based on your breaks. You're going to want to be smart and plan your breaks so that you use them the best you can. And there are lots of things that you're going to do that day that kind of make the test easier to do. I recommend you really investigate that and investigate the rules before you take the test so that you can perform your best. So it just kind of, in summary, some of those things that you might want to do to save yourself some time is, think about what's going to reduce your stress and think about things you can do to make things go faster. Also, you're going to want to keep your energy levels up. So think about your snacks, think about some light exercise during your breaks to get your blood pumping and your brain working. And also during the test, there is a strategy you can use during that 15-minute section when you're supposed to be reading directions, but you'll probably know those directions from all your practicing on UWorld. You can do a brain dump technique when you get into the test where you use that sheet of paper that the Prometric Center person gives you, just write down all the things that you've memorized, those mnemonics, those formulas, anything that's really going to help you that's hard to remember. Write it down before you get started so that you have it on a sheet of paper to refer to when you need it later in the test. And then think about your personal stamina and what you're going to need to do in terms of breaks to keep your energy up all day. And think about foods that you can eat that you like, that are calming, but also will give you energy. Like chocolate. Chocolate can help, but whole grain is good to keep your energy levels at a good level. You don't want to have too much sugar because you don't want that sugar crash. So there's lots of things you can do during the test to reduce your stress. So in conclusion, Test anxiety can really get in your way for step one, but there are strategies you can use in studying and preparing, and even on test day that can help you to be more effective and to reduce the problems related to test anxiety during step one. If you're feeling difficulty as you're preparing for step one, there are lots of resources to help you with your test anxiety. You can talk to your counselor. You can also utilize CAPS, which is the Counseling and Psychological Services on campus. If you're someone who is finding that test anxiety is getting in your way of living your life, you want to talk to a professional about it. There are also great apps like Headspace, Calm, and Breathwork to help you to practice your meditation and mindfulness so that you are less reactive to stress during a test. And there are great books like the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook and The Upside of Stress. These are all things that you can refer to for guidance. I also, in your handout, I have some different resources that you can use in studying, and you're going to find some great advice at these resources because everybody has a strategy that they think is the best strategy, and it's worth it for you to find the thing that fits best to your learning style. I'm going to go ahead and post the link to the handout so that you can have this for your records. But at this point, you can ask any questions that you might have about test anxiety, and you can complete the post survey. It's the same link you used at the beginning, but it asks you how you feel, how stressed out you feel about testing right now, and it helps you to evaluate the presentation. Okay, and if you have any questions, just write them down, and I'm going to go ahead and paste the link in for the handouts below.